My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 73 years old, and on March 12th of this year, my granddaughter Isabella peered at me through the crack of the door of my own home and spoke the words that changed my life forever. "I'm sorry, Grandpa, but Mom says we can't let you in. This isn't your house anymore." The door closed in my face with a sound that still echoes in my ears, the sound of a betrayal I never thought I'd experience. But what my daughter Carol didn't know in that precise moment, as I was made a stranger on the property I myself had paid for over 40 years, is that those words wouldn't destroy me as she expected. Instead, they gave me the clarity I needed to make the most liberating decision of my 73 years of life, to sell the house where I had raised my children and show them that no one, not even the blood of my blood, could cast me out of what is rightfully mine. This is the story of how a daughter can become a squatter in her own father's house, and how that father found the most elegant way to reclaim his dignity. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear will show you that there are lines that should never be crossed, and that sometimes the only way to teach respect is by taking away what is taken for granted. And tell me what country you're listening from, because I need to know if daughters capable of turning their own fathers into refugees in their own homes exist all over the world. But before I tell you how I executed the most satisfying revenge of my life, I have to take you back in time so you can understand exactly who the man was who had just been exiled from his own kingdom. Because what Carol was about to discover would be more devastating than any nightmare she had ever had. It all began 2 years ago when my wife Meredith passed away after a long battle with Alzheimer's. For the last 5 years of her life, I had become her full-time caregiver, watching as the woman I had loved for 48 years gradually disappeared before my eyes. Meredith had been the soul of our family. She was the one who organized the get-togethers, who mediated conflicts, who kept all our children connected to one another. When she died, I not only lost my life partner, but I also lost the person who had been the emotional glue of our family. Carol, my eldest daughter at 46, immediately offered to help me during the grieving period. "Dad," she told me at the funeral, "you're not going to alone in this. I'm going to make sure you have all the support you need." Her words were a great comfort because I knew I would need help navigating the difficult months ahead. Carol had been divorced for 3 years from a 15-year marriage. She had 2 daughters, Isabella, 17, and Sophia, 14. After the divorce, she had been struggling financially to support her daughters alone. She worked as a secretary at a law firm, but her salary was barely enough to cover the rent on a small apartment in a modest neighborhood. "Dad," she said to me a week after the funeral, "I've been thinking about our situation." "Our situation? Well, you're here all alone in this big house, and we're crammed into an expensive apartment. Don't you think it would make sense for us to move in here temporarily?" The proposal seemed reasonable. The house had 4 bedrooms. I was only using 1, and the company of my granddaughters would help me cope with the loneliness. "How long were you thinking of staying?" "Just until I get back on my feet financially. Maybe 6 months, a year at most." Temporarily. That was the word that would become the central theme of my personal nightmare for the next several months. But at that moment, the idea of having my family close gave me hope that maybe I could overcome the loss of Meredith more easily. Carol and the girls moved in the following week. At first, everything seemed to work well. Isabella and Sophia brought new life to the house with their laughter and youthful energy. Carol took charge of making dinners and keeping the house tidy. I felt useful again, helping my granddaughters with their homework and sharing stories about their grandmother. But gradually, I began to notice subtle shifts in the dynamic of the house. Carol started making decisions about the decor without consulting me. "Dad," she'd say, "this house needs a woman's touch after so long with just you and Meredith." She changed the living room curtains, rearranged the furniture, and put the new plants where I used to keep my personal belongings. At first, I said nothing, thinking it was natural for her to want to feel comfortable in what was temporarily her home. But when she started packing away the photos of Meredith in boxes because they made the girls sad, I knew something was wrong. "Carol," I said, finding the pictures of my wife stored in a closet, "why did you hide your mother's photos?" "I didn't hide them, Dad. I put them away to protect them." "Protect them from what?" "From getting damaged, and also because the girls are trying to adjust to life without Grandma, and seeing her all the time makes the process harder for them." The logic sounded reasonable, but my gut told me there was something more to it. Meredith had been a loving and present grandmother to Isabella and Sophia. It made no sense that seeing her pictures would sadden them instead of comforting them. Over the next few months, the changes accelerated. Carol started talking about upgrades she wanted to make to the house. "Dad," she said one morning at breakfast, "this kitchen is so outdated. Don't you think it would be a good idea to renovate it?" "With what money?" "Well, you have savings, and I can contribute a little from my salary." "Carol, this kitchen is perfectly fine. Your mother redesigned it only 8 years ago." "Yes, but tastes change. And if we're going to be living here, we need a more modern and functional space." "If we're going to be living here," the phrase caught my attention. It had shifted from the original temporarily to an indefinite future. "Carol," I asked, "how much longer are you planning to stay?" "Well, the girls are comfortable here. Isabella has already adjusted to her new school, and Sophia has made friends in the neighborhood. It would be cruel to move them again so soon." "But what's the long-term plan?" "The plan is for us to be a happy, extended family. You have company, we have a comfortable home. Everybody wins." There was no mention of finding her own place, no deadline, no acknowledgement that this was still my house. Over the next 6 months, Carol continued to make gradual changes that transformed the house from my home into her territory. She changed the locks for security, installed a different cable system so the girls could watch their shows, and began receiving all of her mail at my address. But the most significant change was in her attitude toward me. She gradually stopped consulting me on household decisions. She started speaking to me as if I were a tenant rather than the owner. "Dad, you need to give us a heads up before inviting people over so we can prepare. Dad, we prefer you not use the living room after 9 p.m. because that's the girls' study time." When I tried to talk to her about these changes, her responses became defensive. "Dad, I'm just trying to create a harmonious family environment. Don't you want us to be happy here?" As if my comfort in my own home was secondary to her happiness. The breaking point came when I decided to put Meredith's photos back in their original places. It was the anniversary of her death, and I wanted to honor her memory by having her image visible in the house we had shared for decades. When Carol came home from work and saw the photos, her reaction was immediate and furious. "Dad, why did you put those pictures out again? We already decided it was better to keep them stored away." "No, you decided to store them. I never agreed. This house needs to move forward, not live in the past. This is the house where your mother lived for 20 years. Her memory is a part of this house. Her memory is in our hearts. It doesn't need to be hanging on the walls." "Yes, it does need to be on the walls because this is still my house, and I decide what goes on the walls." "Dad," she said with a coldness I had never seen in her before, "this house stopped being just yours when you invited us to live here. It's our family home now, and we have to make decisions that work for the whole family. Our family home," as if the act of me inviting them to stay temporarily had granted them permanent ownership rights. "Carol," I said, "you are living here as my guest. That doesn't give you the right to change the rules of my house." "Your house?" she asked with disbelief. "Dad, the girls have been living here for a year. This is their house as much as it is yours." "No, Carol, this is my house, where you are living temporarily." "Well," she retorted, "maybe it's time we redefine what temporarily means." That conversation made it clear that Carol had completely reinterpreted our living situation. In her mind, she was no longer a guest in my house. She was a co-owner of a shared family home, and she expected me to accept that new reality without question. In the weeks that followed, the tension in the house became unbearable. Carol began treating me as if I were the problem, as if my resistance to her changes was just irrational stubbornness. The girls started to notice the tension between us, and Carol began to use them as allies in her campaign for domestic control. "Girls," she would say to Isabella and Sophia at dinner, "don't you think the living room would look better if we moved Grandpa's sofa somewhere else? Isabella, wouldn't it be nice to paint your room a different color? Sophia, don't you think it would be better if Grandpa put his old things in the attic to make more space?" She was systematically turning my own granddaughters against my presence in my own home, making them believe that my belongings and my preferences were obstacles to their comfort. One day I found Isabella rearranging my library without permission. "Isabella," I said, "what are you doing?" Mom asked me to organize the books by color instead of by subject. She says it looks more modern. Those books are organized by subject because that's how I like to find them. But Grandpa, Mom says that now that we live here, we have to think about what looks best for the whole family. There it was again. The idea that my personal preferences in my own house were less important than the aesthetic opinions of my temporary guests. The situation reached a crisis point one Saturday morning when I came home from grocery shopping to find that Carol had hired painters to change the color of the living room without consulting me. "Carol," I yelled, seeing two men painting my walls a color I hadn't chosen. "What is going on here?" "I'm improving the house," she replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "This is my house. You can't hire painters without my permission." "Dad, calm down. It's just paint. We can change it back if you don't like it." "It's not just paint, Carol. It's about my authority in my own home." "Your authority over what? This is where we all live. We all have to make the decisions. I am the owner of this house, and we are your family living in it." The argument escalated into a shouting match that frightened the painters and traumatized my granddaughters. But what hurt the most was realizing that Carol genuinely believed she had the right to make unilateral decisions about my property. That night, after the painters left my living room a color I hated, I had a serious talk with myself. I realized Carol hadn't come to my house temporarily to get back on her feet after the divorce. She had come to take over my house permanently, and she had been executing a gradual plan to turn me into a guest in my own home. The next day, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired a lawyer to help me understand my rights as a homeowner and the options I had to regain control of my house. "Mr. Miller," the lawyer said after hearing my entire story, "legally you have the absolute right to decide who lives on your property and under what conditions. Your daughter has no tenants' rights because she doesn't pay rent, and no ownership rights because she's not on the title of the house. What are my options? You can ask them to leave voluntarily, or you can begin a legal eviction process. But given that they're family, I would recommend trying to negotiate first." That evening, I had one final conversation with Carol. "Carol," I said, "we need to talk about your living situation." "What is there to talk about?" "I think it's time for you to find your own place for you and the girls." Her reaction was total disbelief. "Are you crazy? You want to throw your own granddaughters out on the street?" "I'm not throwing them out on the street. I'm asking them to find their own home." "This is our home, Dad. We've been living here for over a year." "You've been living in my house for over a year as my guests." "Guests? We're your family. Isabella and Sophia grew up in this house. This house was bought by Meredith and me when you were 5 years old. You left this house when you got married at 25. This was never Isabella and Sophia's house. This is the house where they have been living temporarily. Temporarily became permanently when you needed us just as much as we needed you." The logic in her narcissism was flawless. She had rewritten the history of our living situation to justify her appropriation of my house. In her mind, the fact that I had accepted her company after Meredith's death had made me codependent on a situation she now controlled. "Carol," I said with all the firmness I could muster, "you and the girls have 3 months to find another place to live." "Are you serious?" "Completely serious." "Dad, you can't do this. What will your granddaughters think when they find out their own grandpa kicked them out of the house?" "They will think that their grandpa reclaimed control of his own property." "And if we refuse to leave?" "Then I will have to begin a legal eviction process." Carol stared at me with a mixture of shock and fury that made me understand she had truly believed she could seize my house without consequence. "You wouldn't dare kick us out legally." "Don't provoke me, Carol." For the next few weeks, the house became a Cold War zone. Carol stopped speaking to me, except when it was absolutely necessary. The girls looked at me with confusion and resentment, clearly having been influenced by the version of events their mother had told them. But instead of starting to look for another place to live, Carol did the exact opposite. She began to entrench herself more deeply in the house, as if her permanent occupation were a right she was defending against an invader. She changed all the locks again, this time without giving me a copy of the new keys. When I protested, she said it was for family security and that I could ring the bell whenever I wanted to come in, ringing the doorbell to get into my own house. She started having friends and relatives over who had clearly been informed that she was the new lady of the house. When I appeared during these visits, she would introduce me as my dad who lives with us, instead of we're living with my dad. The last straw came when I found she had put my name down as an emergency contact at the girls' schools, but as resident grandfather instead of homeowner. She had officially redefined my status in my own house. That's when I decided to take the most drastic measure of my life. If Carol wanted to play at being the owner of my house, I was going to teach her the difference between being an owner and an occupant. I hired a locksmith to change every single lock in the house on a Tuesday morning while Carol was at work and the girls were at school. But this time, I was the only one who received the new keys. When Carol returned that evening and couldn't get into the house, she called my cell phone screaming, "What did you do to the locks?" "I changed them," I replied calmly. "How are we supposed to get into the house?" "You're not going to get in until we have a serious conversation about the rules of my house." "Are you insane? You can't just leave us outside." "I can, and I am. When you're ready to talk like an adult about your move-out plans, we can sit down and talk." An hour later, Carol arrived with the girls, all of them furious and shouting from the sidewalk, "Open this door right now! Are you ready to talk about finding your own place? We're not going anywhere. This is our house." "No, this is my house, and you are guests who have abused my hospitality." "Dad, you can't kick us out. We're your family." "It's precisely because you're my family that this hurts so much, but I will not allow anyone, not even my own daughter, to make me a stranger in my own home." Isabella approached the door and rang the bell. When I opened it, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Grandpa, why won't you let us in?" "Isabella, my love, your mother and I have to sort out some adult problems. But this is our house. We live here. You have been living in my house, but that doesn't make it your house." "What's the difference?" "The difference is who makes the decisions, who pays the bills, and who has the legal right to decide who can stay and who has to go." Carol came up behind Isabella. "Tell your granddaughter she can come into her own house. Tell your daughters they can come into their grandfather's house when their mother accepts that it is their grandfather's house." That night, Carol and the girls had to stay in a hotel. The next day, Carol returned alone to negotiate. "Dad," she said when I opened the door, "this is ridiculous. We can't live in a hotel indefinitely." "You don't have to live in a hotel indefinitely. You have to find your own place to live. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you can stay in the hotel, or you can stay with some of your friends, or you can acknowledge that this is my house and agree to live by my rules." "What are your rules?" "My rules are simple. I am the owner of this house. My decisions are final, and you are here temporarily while you look for your own place. And if we accept those rules, then you can stay for a maximum of 2 more months while you actively look for another place to live." Carol reluctantly accepted my conditions, but I could see in her eyes that she hadn't given up on her plan to take over my house. She had simply decided to change tactics. For the next 2 weeks, she pretended to be looking for apartments, but every place she visited had some flaw that made it unsuitable for the girls. Too expensive, too small, in a bad neighborhood, too far from their schools. There was always an excuse not to move. It was then I realized that Carol was never going to leave voluntarily. She had invested too much in her fantasy of appropriation to give it up easily. I needed a more permanent solution. I hired a real estate appraiser to evaluate my house. "Mr. Miller," he told me, after inspecting the property, "your house is worth approximately $250,000 in the current market. How quickly could it sell?" "Priced right and in good condition, probably within 80 to 90 days. That night, I made the most liberating decision of my adult life. If Carol wanted to play at being the owner of my house, I would remove the house from the equation entirely. The next day, I put the house up for sale. I hired the most aggressive real estate agency in the city and told them I wanted a quick sale, even if it meant accepting a slightly lower price. When Carol found out, her reaction was total panic. "What do you mean you put the house up for sale?" "I mean exactly that. This house is going to be sold within the next 2 months. "You can't sell the house we live in." "I can, and I am. It's my house. It's in my name, and I can do what I want with it." "And what's going to happen to us?" "You are going to do what you should have done months ago. Find your own place to live." And where will you go? I'm going to buy a small condo where I can live in peace without having to fight for control of my own home. The news of the sale caused total hysteria in Carol and the girls. Isabella and Sophia cried for days, not understanding why their grandfather was destroying the family. Carol alternated between desperate pleas and empty legal threats. "Dad, you can't do this," she begged one day. "The girls will be traumatized. The girls will learn a valuable lesson about the difference between being a guest in a house and owning a house. What if we promise to behave better?" "Carol, the problem isn't your behavior. The problem is that you don't recognize that this is my house." "What if we pay you rent?" "I don't want tenants. I want my house back, or I want to be free from the constant struggle to control my own space." "Is there nothing we can do to make you change your mind?" "Yes, you can move out voluntarily and prove that you respect my authority as the owner." But Carol didn't move. Instead, she intensified her campaign of resistance. She started sabotaging viewings with potential buyers, telling them the house had structural problems or that the neighborhood was dangerous. When I wasn't present, she would tell them it was a forced sale due to family problems and that it would probably be canceled. Her resistance only confirmed I had made the right decision. Carol had revealed her true nature. She was a squatter who refused to recognize the rights of the legitimate owner. Despite Carol's sabotage, I found a buyer after 6 weeks. It was a young couple with 2 small children who fell in love with the house and offered the full asking price in exchange for a quick closing. On the day of the closing, Carol made her final desperate attempt to stop the sale. She appeared at the title company's office with the girls, crying and begging me not to sell their family home. "Mr. Miller," the closing agent said to me privately, "are you sure you want to proceed with this sale? Your family seems very distressed." "I am completely sure," I replied. "My family is distressed because they're about to face a reality they've been avoiding for months." I signed the papers that afternoon. The house sold for $250,000. After paying commissions and legal fees, I was left with $220,000 clean to start my new life. Carol and Isabella showed up at my hotel that night for a final confrontation. "Dad," Carol said, "I hope you're happy. You've just destroyed your own family." "I didn't destroy my family, Carol. I reclaimed my dignity." "Is your dignity worth more than your granddaughter's well-being?" "My dignity is what allows me to be a good grandfather to my granddaughters. Without dignity, I'm nothing more than an ATM who also does chores." Isabella looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Grandpa, why did you sell our house?" "Isabella, my love, I didn't sell your house. I sold my house." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that your house is the place where you make the decisions and pay the bills. My house was the place where I made the decisions and paid the bills. But your mother decided she wanted to become the owner without buying the house. And what are we going to do now?" "Now your mother is going to do what she should have done from the beginning. Find a place of her own where you can be the true owners." Carol exploded. "You're a selfish old man. You only think about yourself." "I am an old man who learned that sometimes the only way to keep your family's respect is to be willing to lose their company." That was the last conversation I had with Carol for 6 months. During that period, I used the money from the sale to buy a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a building with a doorman and security. For the first time in 2 years, I had a home that was completely mine, where no one questioned my decisions, where no one rearranged my things, where no one made me feel like an intruder. The loneliness was difficult at first, but I gradually discovered that I preferred solitude with dignity to company with humiliation. I could decorate how I wanted, invite whomever I wanted, live according to my schedule, eat what I liked. I was free to be the owner of my own space again. 6 months after the sale, I received a call from Isabella. "Grandpa," she said in a timid voice, "could we talk?" "Of course, my love. Where would you like to meet?" We met at a coffee shop near my new condo. Isabella looked more mature, as if the events of the past few months had forced her to grow up quickly. "Grandpa," she said, "I want you to know that I understand why you sold the house." "Oh, you do?" "Yes, at first I thought you were being mean for kicking us out. But after living in our own apartment, I realized something." "What did you realize?" "I realized that when we lived in your house, Mom acted like she was the owner. But when we're in our own apartment, She has to act like what she really is, a single mother doing the best she can. Isabella's words moved me deeply. And how does it feel, living in your own place? It feels real, she replied. It feels like we're responsible for our own decisions instead of fighting for control of something that didn't belong to us. And your mom, how is she handling the situation? At first, she was furious with you. She said you were cruel and selfish. But after a few weeks in the new apartment, she started to change. How did she change, the mind saying? She started taking responsibility for her own decisions. She can't blame anyone else when something goes wrong, because it's our place and our rules. Isabella told me that Carol had found a better paying job because she no longer had the false security of living for free in my house. She had had to learn to budget carefully, to make responsible financial decisions, to be truly independent for the first time since her divorce. Grandpa, Isabella said, I think you sold the house not just to get your dignity back, but also to force Mom to get hers back. What do you mean? When we lived at your house, Mom was turning into someone I didn't like, someone who felt entitled to things she hadn't earned. But now that she has to pay for everything herself, she's going back to being the strong, independent mom I remembered from before. Isabella's perspective made me reflect on my decision from a completely new angle. Maybe selling the house hadn't just freed me from a toxic situation, but it had also freed Carol from a dependency that was transforming her into someone she wasn't really. Would you like to visit my new condo? I asked Isabella. I'd love to, she replied with a genuine smile. That afternoon, Isabella visited my new home. It was the first time she had seen my personal space since the sale of the house. Grandpa, she said as she walked through the rooms, this place feels like you. What do you mean? It feels comfortable and peaceful. It doesn't feel like a battlefield. Isabella was right. My new condo was a haven of peace where I didn't have to constantly defend my authority or justify my decisions. It was a place where I could simply be myself, without having to negotiate every aspect of my daily life. Over the next few weeks, Isabella began to visit me regularly. Sophia, who had initially been more resentful about the sale of the house, gradually began to come along too. But these visits were different from when they lived with me. Now they came because they wanted to spend time with me, not because they were obligated to tolerate my presence in their space. 3 months after my meeting with Isabella, Carol finally called me. Dad, she said, in a voice that sounded different, more humble. Could we talk? Of course. We met at the same coffee shop where I had spoken with Isabella. Carol looked tired, but also more centered, as if she had been working on herself during these months. Dad, she said, I came to ask for your forgiveness. I'm listening. I realized that when we lived in your house, I became someone I didn't like, someone who felt entitled to control things that didn't belong to me. And what made you realize that? Living in my own place made me understand the difference between being responsible for a home and being a guest in someone else's home. Carol explained that during the months in her own apartment, she had had to face all the responsibilities she had been avoiding while living in my house, paying all the bills, making all the decisions, assuming full responsibility for her daughter's well-being. At first, it was terrifying, she confessed, because for over a year I had gotten used to living in your house as if it were my own, but without taking on the real responsibilities of being an owner. And how do you feel now? I feel like an adult again. I feel responsible for my own life instead of trying to control someone else's. The conversation with Carol gave me a deep satisfaction that I hadn't expected. I had not only regained my dignity by selling the house, but I had also forced my daughter to rediscover her own capacity for independence. Dad, Carol said, is there any chance we can rebuild our relationship? That possibility always existed, I replied, but it had to be based on mutual respect, not unilateral dependence. And now we can start over as independent adults who choose each other instead of people who tolerate each other out of family obligation. Over the following months, my relationship with Carol and the girls was rebuilt, slowly but solidly. The visits became frequent again, but now they had a different quality. They came to my condo because they wanted to be with me, and I went to their apartment because they genuinely invited me. Carol started consulting me on important decisions in her life, but as someone who valued my opinion, not as someone who needed my permission. The girls told me about their school and social problems, but as their grandfather who loved them, not as the owner of the house where they lived by obligation. A year after the sale, during a dinner at Carol's apartment, Sophia asked me a question that perfectly summarized what we had been through as a family. "Grandpa," she said, "do you regret selling the house?" "No, my love, not at all." "Why not?" "Because by selling that house, I not only got my home back, but I also helped your mom find hers." "How?" "When your mom lived in my house, she was living in a place that didn't really belong to her, making decisions about things that weren't hers, feeling responsible for a space she hadn't created. That was turning her into someone frustrated and controlling. And now your mom lives in her own home. She makes decisions about her own things and is responsible for a space that she herself is creating. That has turned her back into the strong, independent woman she always truly was." Carol, who had been listening to our conversation from the kitchen, approached the table. "Dad," she said, "you're right. When I lived in your house, I was becoming resentful because I felt I had responsibilities without real authority. But now that I have my own place, I have both the responsibility and the authority, and that makes me feel whole again." That night, as I returned to my condo, I reflected on everything that had happened over the last 2 years. The death of Meredith, the gradual invasion of my house by Carol, the struggle to maintain my authority in my own home, the drastic decision to sell the house, and finally the rebuilding of my family relationship on more solid foundations. I realized that selling the house had been one of the wisest decisions of my life, not only because it had allowed me to reclaim my dignity, but because it had forced my family to grow in ways they never would have if I had continued to allow the dysfunctional situation. Carol had rediscovered her independence and her strength. Isabel and Sophia had learned valuable lessons about the difference between being a guest and an owner, about the importance of respecting legitimate authority, and about the consequences of abusing the generosity of others. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving way to treat your family is to refuse to let them take advantage of you. That setting boundaries isn't cruelty, but education. That protecting your dignity isn't selfishness, but self-respect. 18 months after the sale, I received an unexpected call that made me reflect even more deeply on the consequences of my decision. It was a real estate agent asking if I would be interested in buying a house that had just come on the market. "Why are you calling me specifically?" I asked. "Because the house for sale is the house you sold a year and a half ago. The buyers are selling it because they're moving to another city for work." The proposal intrigued me. Would it be possible to get back the house where I had raised my children, where I had lived with Meredith for decades? It would be symbolically fitting to return to the place where this family crisis had begun. I went to see the house that same week. The new owners had kept it in excellent condition, but they had made some minor changes that made it feel different. It wasn't exactly the same house I had sold, but it wasn't completely different either. As I walked through the rooms, I remembered all the memories I had lived there. The family Christmases, my children's birthdays, the nights caring for Meredith during her illness, the first months after her death, and finally Carol's gradual invasion and the struggle to maintain my authority. But I also realized something important. I no longer needed that house to be happy. My new condo had proven that home is not a specific place, but any place where you can live with dignity and peace. I decided not to buy the house, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I no longer needed it. I had found something more valuable than reclaiming my physical home. I had reclaimed my self-respect and had taught my family to respect me too. 2 years after the sale, during Isabella's 19th birthday celebration, my granddaughter gave me a gift that moved me deeply. It was a photo album she had compiled over months, documenting our family life from before Meredith's death to the present. "Grandpa," she said as she handed me the album, "I wanted you to have this so you would remember that our family didn't break when you sold the house. It got stronger." The pages of the album told the complete story. Photos of Meredith and me in the original house, photos of the children growing up, photos of family dinners before Carol moved in with me, and then more recent photos of our gatherings in my condo and in Carol's apartment. But what impacted me the most was the last page of the album. It was a letter that Isabella had written, explaining what she had learned from the whole experience. "Dear Grandpa, when you were a kid, someone probably taught you that you should respect your elders. But what you taught us is something different and more important. That elders also deserve respect, and that sometimes they have to fight to get it, even within their own family. By selling your house, you taught us that true love sometimes requires difficult decisions. You taught us that being family doesn't mean you have the right to abuse the generosity of others. You taught us that dignity is more important than comfort, and that respect cannot be faked. But above all, you taught us that it is never too late to defend what is yours. It is never too late to demand the treatment you deserve, and it is never too late to start over. Thank you for loving us enough to teach us these difficult lessons. And thank you for showing us that a 73-year-old grandfather can be braver than people half his age. With love and respect, Isabella. That letter made me cry in a way I hadn't cried since Meredith's death. But these were tears of satisfaction, not of pain. Tears of a man who had made a difficult decision and had lived to see that it was the right decision. To you who are listening, I want to leave you with the most important lessons I learned from this experience. Never allow anyone, not even your own family, to make you a stranger in your own home. Never confuse generosity with the surrender of your rights, and never be afraid to make drastic decisions when gradual ones have not worked. My advice is this: if someone in your life is abusing your hospitality, set clear boundaries immediately. If someone is making decisions about your property without your permission, reclaim control immediately. And if someone does not respect your authority in your own space, do not be afraid to remove that space from the equation. Dignity is not negotiated, respect is not begged for, and your house is your castle, no matter who wants to conquer it. Tell me what country you're listening from, and tell me if this story made you reflect on the boundaries in your own life. Because sometimes we need to hear about the courage of others to find the courage to defend what is ours. My story ended better than I ever expected. I not only regained my dignity, but I helped my family find theirs. I not only got my home back, but I helped my daughter create hers. I not only taught a lesson about respect, but I received an education on the transformative power of firm love. Selling that house was the most difficult and most liberating decision of my life. And if I had to do it again, I wouldn't hesitate for a second. Because at the end of the day, I would rather live alone with dignity than accompanied without respect. And that is a lesson that every human being, regardless of their age, should learn and remember. But there is something more to this story that I need to tell you, something I discovered months after the sale that made me understand that my decision had had consequences that went far beyond what I originally imagined. A year after selling the house, I ran into Helen Vargas by chance, a neighbor who had lived on the same block for over 20 years. Helen knew my family well and had been a silent witness to many of the events that had led to the sale. "Ethan," she said when we met at the supermarket, "I need to tell you something you might not know." "What is it, Helen?" "About what was really happening in your house before you sold it." Helen told me that during the months leading up to the sale, she had observed behavior from Carol that completely surprised me. Apparently, Carol had been telling the neighbors that she was the new owner of the house, that I had decided to transfer the property to her due to my advanced age. Carol was telling everyone that you had acknowledged you could no longer handle such a big house, Helen explained. She even showed them documents that, according to her, were property transfer papers. The revelation hit me deeply. Not only had Carol been physically appropriating my house, but she had also been socially appropriating my identity as the owner. She had created a complete narrative in the neighborhood where I was the senile old man who had graciously ceded his home to his responsible daughter. "And what kind of documents was she showing them?" I asked Helen. "I don't know exactly, but they looked official. They had stamps and signatures. Some neighbors thought you had made a gift of the house while you were still alive." This information made me reflect on how systematic Carol's plan to take over my house had been. It hadn't been simply a gradual invasion motivated by convenience. It had been a deliberate strategy to establish social legitimacy over a property that did not belong to her. "Helen," I asked, "did any of the neighbors question this story?" "Some did," she replied, "especially when they saw that you were still living there, but that Carol was making all the decisions about the house maintenance and renovations." "What kind of decisions?" "Well, she hired the landscaping service and told them to report directly to her. She changed the mailbox to have her name on it in addition to yours. She even spoke with the gas company about changing the account to her name. Each revelation was more disturbing than the last. Carol had not just been living in my house as if it were hers. She had been executing a systematic plan to officially transfer the property to her name without my knowledge or consent. "And nobody told me any of this while it was happening?" I asked Helen. "Some neighbors wanted to tell you, but Carol had explained to them that you had memory problems and that it would be better not to confuse you with technical details about the property transfer." Carol had used my age as an excuse to isolate me from the information that would have alerted me to her true intentions. She had created a narrative where I was incompetent to handle my own affairs, thus justifying her control over my property. "Helen," I said, "do you have any evidence of these conversations or documents?" "Not physically, but I can put you in touch with other neighbors who witnessed these situations." Over the next few weeks, I spoke with several neighbors who confirmed Helen's story. Carol had been meticulously preparing the ground for a property transfer that I had never authorized. She had been building social legitimacy for an act that legally constituted fraud. The full understanding of what Carol had been planning made me feel simultaneously validated in my decision to sell the house and horrified by the extent of her betrayal. I hadn't just been fighting against a daughter who had gotten too comfortable in my house. I had been defending myself against someone who was actively working to steal my property. I decided to confront Carol with this new information. I called her and asked her to meet for an important conversation. When we met, I presented everything I had discovered through the neighbors. "Carol," I said, "I need you to explain what those documents were that you were showing the neighbors about the transfer of my house." Her immediate reaction was surprise and then defensiveness. "What documents are you talking about?" "The documents you used to convince the neighbors that I had transferred the ownership of the house to you." Carol was silent for a moment, clearly calculating what to say. "Dad," she said finally, "those were just papers for the home insurance. The neighbors misunderstood what I was showing them." "And why were you showing them insurance papers?" "Because they asked who was responsible for the house when they saw that I was managing the repairs and maintenance." "And why didn't you just tell them that it was my house where you were living temporarily?" "Because it's complicated to explain our family situation to people who don't know us well." Each of Carol's answers was more evasive than the last. It was clear she had been caught in a lie she had been maintaining for months, but she was unwilling to admit the full truth. "Carol," I said, "the neighbors told me you specifically said that I had passed the house on to you because I could no longer manage it due to my age." "That's not exactly what I said." "What did you say exactly?" "I said I was helping you manage the house because living alone was difficult for you after Mom's death." "And how do you explain telling them that I had memory problems?" "I never said that." "Carol, I have 3 neighbors who are willing to testify that you said exactly that." Her expression changed when she realized she had been completely exposed. "Dad," she said in a broken voice, "I exaggerated our situation a little, but it was to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From the neighbors who might think you weren't capable of taking care of your own house." "And the solution was to lie to them by telling them it wasn't my house anymore?" Carol finally broke down and confessed the whole truth. During the months she had lived in my house, she had been convinced that I would eventually transfer the property to her voluntarily. When she realized that wasn't going to happen, she had started to create a social narrative that would justify an involuntary transfer. "I thought that if everyone in the neighborhood already saw you as someone who had handed over responsibility for the house, it would be easier to convince you to make the official transfer," she confessed. "And if you refused, I thought I could use the neighbor's testimony about your diminished capacity to justify a transfer for mental health reasons." The coldness with which Carol had planned to usurp my property left me speechless. She hadn't just been living in my house without respect. She had been systematically building a case to have me declared incompetent and legally steal my home. "Carol," I said when I could finally speak, "do you realize that what you were planning constitutes fraud?" "It wasn't fraud, Dad. It was a planned transition of family property." "A transition that I never authorized and that required lying about my mental capacity." "I thought it was what was best for the whole family." "What was best for the whole family or what was best for you?" Carol had no answer to that question. This late revelation about Carol's true intentions made me appreciate the decision I had made to sell the house even more. I had not only avoided being turned into a guest in my own home, I had avoided being the victim of an elaborate fraud that would have stolen my most valuable asset. It also made me reflect on how many older people might be facing similar situations without realizing it. How many elderly parents might be being manipulated by children who reinterpret family hospitality as an opportunity for property appropriation. I decided to use my experience to help others. I began giving talks at senior centers about the importance of protecting their property and legal documents, even from family members. I shared my story as an example of how misdirected family love can turn into financial abuse if clear boundaries are not set. The most important lesson I learned, I would tell my audiences, is that being generous with your family does not mean giving up your rights. Helping your children does not mean allowing them to rob you, and loving someone does not mean allowing them to abuse that love. These talks gave me a new purpose in my life. They allowed me to transform a painful experience into an educational tool that could prevent others from going through similar situations. And they helped me fully process everything I had lived through during those difficult months. 6 months after discovering the full truth about Carol's plans, I received an unexpected call from a lawyer representing a family in a situation almost identical to mine. An 80-year-old woman whose son had been living in her house temporarily and had begun to make changes that suggested plans for a permanent takeover. "Mr. Miller," the lawyer said, "your story has become well known in the local legal community. My client asked me to contact you to ask if you would be willing to testify about your experience." I agreed to help, and over the next few months, I got involved in several similar cases. Each case reaffirmed that my experience had not been unique and that the drastic decision I had made had been not only right for me, but potentially preventive for others. Through this work, I met dozens of seniors who had faced different degrees of family appropriation. Some had lost their homes permanently. Others had managed to regain control, but only after costly and painful legal battles. And some, like me, had made preventive decisions that had preserved both their dignity and their assets. "What you did," one of the victims, who had managed to get her home back after a 2-year legal battle, told me, was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting to regain control of your property, you removed the property from the equation and forced your family to face the reality of their actions. This external perspective helped me see my decision from a completely new angle. I hadn't just reclaimed my dignity. I had developed a strategy that others could use to protect themselves from similar situations. Now, 3 years after selling the house, I can say it was the smartest and bravest decision of my late adult life. It not only protected me from being a victim of family fraud, but it also transformed my relationship with my family from one based on dependency and manipulation to one based on mutual respect and genuine love. Carol now works as a consultant in elder financial abuse prevention, using her own experience as an example of how good intentions can turn into abusive behaviors if not carefully monitored. Her work is her way of making amends for what she did to me, and also her way of processing her own guilt. Isabella is studying law with a specialization in family law and estate planning. She tells me that my story inspired her to dedicate her career to protecting seniors from family financial abuse. "I want to make sure," she says, "that other grandparents don't have to sell their houses to get their dignity back." Sophia has become my most frequent activity partner. We go to the movies together, to restaurants, to cultural events. Our relationship has deepened in a way that would never have been possible when we were living in the same house under tense circumstances. And I have found a peace and satisfaction in my life that I had not experienced in years. My condo is my sanctuary, my refuge, my completely owned space. But I have also created a network of family and social relationships that nourish me without complications or manipulations. The sale of that house taught me that sometimes losing something material allows you to gain something spiritual, that sometimes walking away from a toxic situation allows you to create something healthy, and that it is never too late to defend what is yours, no matter who is trying to take it from you. My final message to you who are listening is this: do not be afraid to make drastic decisions when gradual ones have failed. Do not be afraid to protect what is yours, even from your own family. And do not confuse love with permissiveness. Your dignity is worth more than any property, but sometimes you have to protect your property to preserve your dignity. And that protection, no matter how painful it is at the time, may turn out to be the most loving gift you can give your family in the long run. Thank you for listening to my story on Whispers of Experience. If my journey has touched you, please subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of human life.